Okay, today we're getting into something pretty fascinating and definitely speculative. Could the fountains of the great deep from the Genesis flood story actually be talking about, well, giant mud volcano eruptions?
It's a really intriguing idea. We're basically trying to connect this ancient narrative with, modern geological processes.
Exactly. So our mission here is to unpack the facts, see where the connections might be, but also, really importantly, look at the major challenges this theory faces from mainstream science.
Right. So the starting point is Genesis chapters 6 to 11. It describes this unique catastrophic global flood.
And a key part is the fountains of the great deep, supposedly a huge source of the water, along with rain, the floodgates of the sky.
Correct. And historically, before the Enlightenment around the 18th century, most Christians did see Genesis as describing a real global flood. They thought it explained all the fossils we find.
And some interpretations today, like from young Earth creationists, suggest this water came from inside the Earth, maybe from places like mid-ocean ridges.
Which leads us neatly to mud volcanism.
What is it exactly?
Yeah, what are we talking about here?
Okay, so mud volcanoes aren't like typical magma volcanoes. They're geological structures, basically vents that spew out buried, clay-rich mud and rocks.
Well, a pretty bold theory.
Okay.
That the sands of Giza, maybe even some found inside the pyramid.
Inside, wow.
Yeah, they might not be local at all. They could have come from the eye of the Sahara.
You mean the Richat structure?
Yeah.
The one in Mauritania?
That's the one. A full 2,000 kilometers away. It definitely pushes back against the standard geological story.
2,000 kilometers. That's a huge distance. So what makes this theory even plausible? Why not just local sand?
Well, let's start with the source itself, the Eye of the Sahara. It's enormous, about 40 kilometers across.
Huge. I've seen pictures from space. Looks like an impact crater.
It does, but it isn't. It was mistaken for one for a while, but it's actually a deeply eroded geological uplift, a dome.
An uplift?
What's really key here is that it's essentially a giant natural sand factory. It's always eroding.
A sand factory. So it just like churns out sand.
Pretty much, yeah. It exposes this incredible variety of rocks, lots of quartz-rich sandstone, naturally.
Right, sandstone makes sand.
But also different igneous rocks, formed from magma or lava.
Like a basalt, granite.
Things like that, yes. And crucially, many have been altered by hot, mineral-rich water. Geologists call it hydrothermal alteration.
Okay, so a unique source churning out specific stuff. How does that connect to Giza? What's special about Giza sand?
Good question. Giza sand isn't just any old sand. It has a very distinct mineral profile.
Meaning?
It's mostly quartz, sure, that's common, but a big chunk, about 55% of its heavier trace minerals, what we call the heavy fraction.
Okay.
That fraction is full of specific things like pyroxenes, amphiboles, and epidotes. They're like tiny chemical markers.
And you're saying the Richat structure produces those specific markers?
And that's the core of the theory. The match is, well, remarkable. Richat sandstone provides the quartz, obviously.
The common stuff.
Right. But it's igneous rocks, the hydrothermally altered ones. They line up perfectly with those specific pyroxenes, amphiboles, and epidotes we find at Giza.
Like a mineral fingerprint.
Exactly. A fingerprint pointing straight back to Richat, 2,000 kilometers away.
Wow, okay.
Conceptually.
Okay, so it's an analogy for the sheer size involved in the theory.
Exactly. The theory proposes that the fountains were this unprecedented worldwide surge in tectonic activity. Huge pressure builds up underground, leading to potentially millions of mud volcanoes erupting pretty much simultaneously across the globe.
And the idea is this could explain what? The floodwaters and the fossils.
Conceptually, yes. The massive expulsion of water and mud contributes to the flood itself, and the sheer volume of sediment could bury organisms rapidly, creating fossils. Plus, releasing all that methane and CO2 could cause, dramatic atmospheric and climate changes.
This is the theory.
Yeah.
But this is where we hit the major roadblocks, right? What does mainstream geology say?
Well, the first massive hurdle is the water volume. To cover the highest mountains today, you'd need vastly more water than exists on Earth's surface, or is known to be accessible within the crust or mantle. There's just no known geological mechanism to suddenly release that much extra water from inside the Earth.
Not even close to enough water. And what about the rocks themselves? Don't they tell a different story?
Overwhelmingly, yes. There's so much evidence for long timescales and conditions that just don't fit a single rapid global flood. Think about thick salt layers evaporates. They need long periods of evaporation, drying out repeated cycles.
Right, not a world covered in water.
Exactly. And you find things like fossilized mud cracks, raindrop prints, even ancient desert sand dunes preserved in rock layers. Those all point to dry land exposed to air. You find fossil river channels formed above sea level. A global flood would likely destroy those, not preserve them neatly in layers.
What is something like the Grand Canyon? Proponents sometimes point to it, but geologically.
The geology there suggests long processes. The cliffs are stepped because different rock layers hardened over time before being eroded. If it was all soft, recent flood sediment, it would have just slumped, not formed those distinct cliffs. Limestone formation, too, that generally requires slow precipitation and relatively calm water over thousands, millions of years, not turbulent floodwaters.
And the fossils themselves, the theory suggests chaotic burial, right?
Yeah, but the fossil record shows a very clear order. The different types of organisms appear in specific layers globally. It's not the chaotic mix you'd expect from one giant tumbling flood event. The distribution of species doesn't fit that model either.
And finally, the sheer violence of the proposed event. Millions of simultaneous mud volcanoes.
The scale is just unprecedented. There's no evidence anything like that has ever happened. And the energy release, the atmospheric disruption, the sheer turbulence. It's hard to see how something like Noah's Ark, or complex life generally, could possibly survive that kind of planetary upheaval. The conditions would likely be unsurvivable.
So wrapping this up, we've looked at this really imaginative theory linking the Genesis flood narrative to mud volcanoes, using things like Lucy for power and Richat for scale.
The conceptual links are there visually.
But, and this is the crucial part, when you hold it up against the weight of geological evidence, the water volume problem, the rock layers telling stories of long ages and dry periods, the fossil record,
Yeah.
the theory faces enormous, really overwhelming challenges.
The physical evidence points very strongly in a different direction.
Which leaves us, and you, with a really important question to ponder. How do we navigate these intersections between ancient accounts and modern scientific understanding? What can we learn from this ongoing dialogue about interpreting the past and understanding the deep, complex history of our planet?
You ever wonder about those ancient stories? You know, the ones about a great flood, they pop up in cultures all over the world. Are they just old tales, maybe folklore? Or could they be actual echoes of huge environmental shifts from Earth's past, like really big events? Today, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive. We want to unpack some pretty compelling geological evidence. We're talking massive leak spillovers, breached natural dams, things that could cause catastrophic floods. Yet our mission here is to give you a shortcut, really, a way to get informed on this by looking straight at the observations, the correlations in the land itself. And we're doing this without leaning heavily on, say, conventional carbon dating or evolutionary timelines, just sticking to what the sources lay out. Plus, we'll touch on something pretty intriguing later, this idea that maybe knowledge about these cataclysms has been, I don't know, controlled or obscured. We'll even mention something called the CIA Adam and Eve story. So, yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so when we talk about catastrophic floods, a really huge example is the Missoula floods. Out in eastern Washington, right? Geologist J. Harlen Bretz.
He spent years, literally years, looking at the channeled scablands. Immense dry canyons, weird circular holes, massive cliffs that just scream, giant waterfall used to be here.
Yeah, and he did a lot of this on foot, just meticulously observing. What he found directly challenged the big idea of the time, Uniformitarianism. You know, that everything happens slowly, gradually. But the evidence Bretz found, it was just overwhelming. Think about Dry Falls. It's this huge cliff, like 5 times wider than Niagara Falls, but bone dry now.
Wow.
Exactly. And these giant plunge pools below it. He found huge areas where the basalt bedrock was just stripped clean. Massive boulders move miles from where they started. It points to just unimaginable power, water power, evidence you just couldn't ignore, really.
And they figured out the mechanism, right? Glacial Lake Missoula.
That's the one. A massive lake, bigger than some of the Great Lakes combined, held back by a giant ice dam.
Which broke.
Periodically, yeah. It ruptured, releasing these unbelievable volumes of water. They call them jökulhlaups.
Bretz thought it was one big event at first, didn't he?
He did, but later work found layers, stratigraphic evidence suggesting maybe more than 40 separate floods.
40. Good grief.
Yeah, and the peak flows, estimates are like 10 times the combined flow of all the rivers in the world today. Just staggering.
It's incredible. And Bretz's story itself is interesting at how long it took for his ideas to be accepted.
Absolutely. It shows how how scientific thinking can sometimes resist really compelling evidence if it rocks the boat too much. But in the end, the physical evidence, what you can actually see and measure, won out. It really highlights how important direct observation is.
Okay, so sticking with these immense water events, let's talk about the Black Sea deluge theory. That's another big one. William Ryan and Walter Pittman put forward this idea of a catastrophic flood there too, right? Mediterranean Sea involved.
Exactly. They proposed that the Mediterranean Sea, which was rising after the last ice age, catastrophically broke through the Bosporus Strait. Before that, the Black Sea was actually a lower-level freshwater lake.
So what's the evidence on the ground or under the water?
Well, they took sediment cores from the Black Sea floor, and the layers tell a really dramatic story. You find these layers of old freshwater mud, then bam, suddenly there's this thin layer of smashed up freshwater shells, like violently broken. And right on top of that, sediments full of saltwater species that had never been in the Black Sea before.
Wow, so it's a really abrupt change.
It screams rapid transition, yeah. The idea is this massive waterfall formed at the Bosporus, maybe hundreds of times the volume of Niagara, pouring salt water into the freshwater lake. It would have flooded something like 100,000 square kilometers pretty quickly.
It's just huge. And the implication isn't just geological, it's potentially human, right? People living around that freshwater lake.
That's the really compelling part. It could have displaced huge numbers of people, forced migrations. Some even speculate this event could be the origin or one of the origins of the Noah's Ark story and similar flood myths.
It connects these vast geological events directly to human history and cultural memory.
It does. You see how these large-scale climate shifts, like sea levels rising, can trigger these regional disasters that completely reshape the map and, well, human lives, and those memories persist.
Okay, this leads us to that more controversial point you mentioned, the idea of knowledge being managed or suppressed, the CIA Adam and Eve story. Can you unpack that a little? It sounds kind of out there.
It is a bit unusual, yeah. It refers to a book by Chan Thomas from the 60s. He claimed Earth goes through these global cataclysms roughly every 7,000 years. Pole shifts, massive floods, the works.
Okay, and the CIA connection.
Well, the strange part is that parts of this book, which had been classified for some reason, were declassified by the CIA in 2013. But for many people interested in these kinds of theories, the declassification didn't debunk it. It actually seemed to fuel suspicion.
How so?
It kind of fed the idea that maybe there was something they were trying to hide, you know? It shows how trying to control information can sometimes backfire and almost validate the thing you're trying to dismiss.
So why would anyone, CIA or otherwise, want to suppress knowledge about potential past cataclysms? What are the suggested motives?
Well, people float various ideas. One is social stability. The thought of periodic civilization-ending events could cause panic, right?
Yeah.
Undermine authority. Another angle sometimes mentioned is controlling resources or power. If you know certain areas are prone to massive upheaval, that knowledge is power. It could challenge established history, borders, everything.
Interesting. So wrapping things up a bit, the geological evidence from places like the Missoula floods, the Scablands, dry falls, and the Black Sea evidence that sharp transition the cores, it really provides strong support for these massive lake spillover or breach dam type floods, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It gives us a concrete scientific way to understand how such massive ancient deluges could happen based on observable features without necessarily relying on the standard long-age dating method.
And connecting back to the myths.
Well, the fact that so many cultures have these flood stories, often with specific details that seem to echo these kinds of regional geological catastrophes, it suggests they aren't just fantasy. They might be deeply embedded cultural memories of real events that profoundly shaped human history, events that showed just how dynamic and sometimes violent our planet can be. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Really understanding our planet's history might mean keeping an open mind about these huge, catastrophic processes, things happening much faster than we usually think. And maybe it also means keeping a critical eye on how information about our past, especially potentially disruptive information like the whole CIA Adam and Eve situation, might be handled or, well, obscured. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other truths might still be out there, waiting for us to see them clearly? If you've ever thought ancient texts might hold more or wondered about, the standard scientific models, this one's for you.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to see how this lens changes our view of Earth's physical history. It directly questions uniformitarianism.
Right, the idea that everything geological happens slow and steady over ages.
Precisely. The sources we looked at argue that it's maybe not just science, but kind of a philosophical default setting. If you can explain something slowly, that becomes the go-to, even if a faster, catastrophic event might actually fit better.
Okay, so let's get into it. Revelation describes some, well, huge events. The seven seals talk about a massive earthquake, right? One that moves every mountain and island out of its place.
Yeah, imagine the scale of that.
And then the trumpets like a great mountain burning with fire thrown into the sea, massive tsunamis, disruption, and then the sky darkening, sun, moon, stars, obscured.
And it's striking how that description parallels things we understand scientifically now. That darkening, it sounds a lot like a volcanic winter.
Oh, right, from massive eruptions throwing aerosols way up high.
Exactly, blocking sunlight, causing cooling. We've seen small versions, but Revelation seems to describe it globally. And then the climax in the seven bowls, it describes an ultimate tectonic event.
Where every island fled away and the mountains were not found.
Yes, implying a total reshaping of the planet's surface. This lines up surprisingly well with something called catastrophic plate tectonics.
Not the slow drift we learn about in school.
No, this is suggesting continents could potentially move thousands of kilometers, maybe in just days or weeks, rapidly. And it's not totally out there. Some interpretations of Venus suggest it might have undergone a rapid global resurfacing too. Makes it seem more plausible for Earth, perhaps.
Wow, okay. So if these huge, fast events happened, what does that imply for the rocks and landforms we see today?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because connecting this idea to the global flood narrative, our sources point to features that are tricky for purely gradual models.
Like what?
Think about widespread sedimentary rocks covering continents, marine fossils high up in mountain ranges.
Things you wouldn't expect if sea levels rose slowly.
Right, and especially things like polystrate fossils.
Polystrate, what are those?
Imagine finding fossilized tree trunks standing upright, vertically, through multiple rock layers.
Yeah.
Layers that are supposed to represent millions of years different than age.
How would a tree stand there for millions of years while climate slowly builds up?
Exactly, it would rot away. Uniformitarianism struggles there. But there's this flood log mat idea. After Mount St. Helens erupted, Spirit Lake ended up with huge mats of logs. Rapid burial by water and sediment could potentially explain how these trees get fossilized vertically, quickly. It points towards catastrophic flooding, not slow layering over eons.
So this really reframes how we might interpret the geological evidence itself. And if the processes were rapid, that must mess with the timing, right? The whole geologic timescale.
It absolutely does.
Right.
Mainstream geology uses that timescale, and fossils are key to dating the layers.
But wait, the sources mention a kind of circular reasoning here?
Yes, that's the argument. That evolution is proven by the fossil order in the rocks. But the rocks are dated based on the assumed evolutionary stage of the fossils found in them.
So fossil A is older than fossil B because it's in a lower rock layer, and we know the lower layer is older because it contains fossil A, which is evolutionarily older than B.
Kind of, yeah. It builds on an assumption about evolutionary progression to establish the timeline, which then supports the evolutionary progression. It's a potential loop. Questioning that initial assumption about gradualism and the fossil order could unravel those vast timescales.
Which brings up the question, why has there historically been resistance to these catastrophic ideas in science?
Let's think about J. Harlen Bretz.
The channeled scablands guy.
That's him. His idea in the early 20th century about massive, sudden Ice Age floods carving out eastern Washington. It was called preposterous, totally dismissed by the uniformitarian geologists of the day. Took decades for his evidence to be accepted.
Because it didn't fit the slow and steady mold.
Pretty much. It shows how, sometimes, a prevailing philosophy can make people resist evidence that points to catastrophe. Even radiometric dating, which seems so solid, can have issues according to these sources.
How so?
They point to examples like excess radiogenic argon found in volcanic rocks from the Grand Canyon. Potassium-argon dating gave ages that were vastly older than expected based on when the lava flows actually occurred.
So the clock wasn't zeroed properly, making the rocks seem way older.
Essentially, yes. If there's extra argon trapped in the rock when it forms, it throws the calculation way off. It suggests the dating methods might not always be as infallible as presented.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive suggests Revelation could be read as, well, a surprisingly coherent framework for Earth's more dramatic history, one that challenges that standard gradual view.
Indeed. The argument is that the Earth itself, Its geology might actually bear witness to these rapid, profound events if we adjust our interpretive lens. And maybe it leaves you, the listener, with a thought. How much of how we see any history, scientific or otherwise, is filtered through the philosophical glasses we wear? What might we be missing if we don't try on a different pair?